With Valve's semi-new or not at all new policy depending on when you watch this, you're finally able to refund games on Steam now. And man, could it not have come at a better time. Thank you, Warner Brothers.
I'll be taking my $100 back now.
There are a lot of games that I still want to cover, but I realize not all of them would make good material for a whole episode. With One Finger Death Punch, it's an amazing game that I think is worth every cent, but there's not really a lot to talk about. No pseudo-philosophy, it's just a good game. So then I figured I'd start a new sub-series with the incredibly snappy title, Refund or Not. Given that Steam gives players who play for under 2 hours and own a game for less than 14 days the chance to refund, I'm going to play the games in this series for an hour and a half and give some impressions before I give my verdict on whether you should refund or not. Tembo the Badass Elephant is a game that somewhat turned me off from its name alone. Aside from badass being a word that's become increasingly synonymous with cringeworthy, eye-rolling, self-proclaimed cool because I say so types, it looks like a bog-standard indie platformer at first glance. I'm not really sure this game can entirely be called indie though, considering its developer Game Freak isn't exactly low profile, nor is the game's publisher Sega. Well, I guess that's debatable these days, isn't it? You take on the role of Tembo, who's apparently an old war buddy of this guy here. There's no spoken dialogue, text is very seldom used, and cutscenes are played out in a crude comic book style that shows you all you need in the game's simple story. It fits the theme of the game well enough, and leads me to believe that the budget for Tembo was spent in a pretty utilitarian way, as in not wasting it all on expensive voice talent that doesn't get utilized properly. There's a lot of polish in the actual stages, with everything being nicely stylized, moving at a smooth 60 FPS, and with a ton of destructible objects for Tembo to smash into. There's onomatopoeia text all over the game, from when you kill an enemy to simply running across the ground. Gameplay-wise, everything controls pretty well for the most part. The game rewards keeping up momentum, and you're encouraged to trample, butt stomp, and uppercut enemies and objects to keep things moving. Tembo can also shoot water from his trunk to put out fires and activate certain objects. There's just a touch of clunkiness to all of your actions, which I almost want to say fits the game considering you're playing as an elephant, but it can get a little obnoxious, especially when trying to use the giant bowling balls and having them get stuck on a bounce pad. When you get the hang of the controls though, it's very satisfying to watch everything on the screen get destroyed thanks to your actions. You can plow through most enemies very easily, with the phantom grunt troops being there solely for you to keep a combo going. You'll encounter tanks, drones, mountaineers, and a number of different enemies with varying degrees of difficulty. The levels aren't always a straight run to the right, and are pretty expansive with numerous paths to take, secrets to find, and peanuts to collect for extra lives. Speaking of peanuts, the military base you're at is called the Shell. I don't really get it actually. Could somebody explain that joke to me? The game is fairly light on cruel, unpredictable deaths, most of which are subtle and play upon your desire to constantly go to the right like in other platformers. One level even begins with a cliff directly to your right, and you can guess what I did the first time I played it. Sad to say, the first boss I encountered was a bit lackluster. It just involves using your trunk to extinguish fireballs and continuously charging the boss until he falls off the edge. That's all. It felt a little underwhelming after the very enjoyable first 4 stages. If there's one thing I've praised Game Freak for recently doing away with in their Pokemon series, it was that annoying beep that continuously plays when your Pokemon were low on health. For whatever reason, they decided to bring that back for Tembo, and unlike Pokemon, it never stops. Given that the sound assets in this game are otherwise very satisfying and the music is pretty good here, I hope they'll offer an option to disable that low health noise in the future. All it does is remind me that I'm going to hear that sound one day in a hospital on my deathbed, and I don't want to think about that when I'm playing a lighthearted game about smashing things as an elephant. Tembo had a pretty rocky launch too, with the game being unplayable for the better part of its first day. It seems as though the problems have been solved now, and I was able to play the game without any issues. But how a 2D platformer of all things could have problems like that is something only Sega could accomplish. Or any one of these companies, I guess. After all is said and done, does Tembo deserve to be refunded or not? I'm going with not. That being the positive, as in, don't refund this game if you get it. Oh god, that's kind of confusing actually. Maybe I should clarify that more. Given that Tembo even has a free demo you can download and try before putting the money down, you have another venue of testing it out before you decide to buy and keep the full version. It's a satisfying game with a great presentation, excellent sound assets, and fun destruction abound. Despite what some might think, I'm actually a pretty cynical person when it comes to indie platformers. So I was pleasantly surprised that a game called Tembo the Badass Elephant didn't dive into stupid, meme-y territory and was just a good game in its own right. It's definitely worth giving a shot.